Welcome to Cool Talk. Today we talk about the most influential people in the Western world, the ancient Greeks, the birth of rationalism, humanism, and democracy. Now keep in mind that the ancient Greeks are not just on the mainland that we know of today. It's the makeup of several city-states around the Aegean Sea: Athens, Thebes, Sparta, Crete, Mycenae. For the most part, these city-states did not have the resources to survive on their own. Landlocked by mountains, they looked out to the sea. To survive, they had to engage in trade and conquest. This meant sea travel, which meant merchant ships, navies, and ports. These ports became trade posts and great avenues for exchanges of culture, inventions, and ideas. These city-states started as settlements and clans ruled by a king or a tribal chief. The settlements were called polis, which is the root of the word politics. It defined a governing body, a political order. These different areas were independent of each other. They had different languages. They never centralized into one. They never got along. Then monarchy, the government of one, became oligarchy, the government of few. This led to democracy, the government of many. Laws were written so all could see, not just the opinion of one person. Yet the nobles had great power, and common citizens eventually united, and they armed themselves. They were called the hoplites. They revolted. They made demands. They gained power, and they gained a voice. Merchants adopted the Lydian coin. It was a form of currency, and now there was no need to be a landowner to make money. Now the common people, the hoplites, would often turn to one person, a leader, to guide them. He was called the tyrant. Now the term tyrant is not the oppressive dictator we think of today. These tyrants were chosen by the people, and they were often nobles with democratic ideas. Now in Greek mythology, the gods were not perfect. They weren't from nature. They were not animals. They had human forms. They fought among themselves. They had many human traits. Hades, Persephone, Hera, Apollo, Poseidon. Then came the king of the gods, Zeus, who loved to come down and procreate children with mortal women. Among the offspring came Hercules, and a lot of the stories of Hercules was him conquering nature, killing beasts and animals. Then comes the story of Troy. Prince Hector and Paris from Troy go on a peace mission and visit King Menelaus of Sparta. But instead, Paris runs off with the king's wife, Queen Helen. Well, then angry King Menelaus and his brother King Agamemnon of Mycenae put together a navy and attacked Troy. The war would last 10 years. Well, the kings fooled the Trojans by giving them a peace offering, a wooden horse. Accepting the gift, the horse was brought into the city. That night, soldiers that were hiding within the horse snuck out and opened the gates. The soldiers from outside entered the city and took Troy. This story was immortalized in the works of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Some historians differ on whether Homer was a blind storyteller of renown or maybe a compilation of writers. Whatever the case, the style, the drama, the human frailties, the defiance towards the gods, the numerous characters that came out, Hector, Paris, Achilles, and the epic scale influenced writers for ages to come. Now, Greek kingdoms had built palaces and cities, but suddenly the cities depopulated. Why? Some believe environmental catastrophes brought famine. Whatever the reason, it was a stagnant time, the Dark Ages. For centuries, the Greeks struggled. But progress slowly came, and in 776 BCE, the nations began a 4-year celebration of Zeus, with festivals and athletic events, wrestling, boxing, javelins, foot races, and chariot races. These were the Olympics. When the Olympic Games took place, the nations called a truce to all wars. Time was measured in 4-year intervals called the Olympiads. Example, you could say, my son was born on the 2nd year of the 9th Olympiad. A huge statue of Zeus in a chair was erected in the temple, one of the great wonders of the ancient world. The athletes would often participate in the nude. This was a practice probably started by the Spartan, whose boys and girls would often train in the nude. There was a great admiration for the human form, and the word gymnasium comes from the Greek word gymnos, which means naked. For 1,000 years, there were Olympic Games, until 393 AD when Roman Emperor Theodosius wanted to make Christianity a state religion. So he suppressed the pagan festivals and banned the games. As for the statue of Zeus, locked in a temple and forgotten, some say it was burnt in a fire. The Spartans, a military state dedicated to training and conquest. They conquered the Messenians. The conquest took 20 years. When it was over, the Messenians lost and were made to work the farmlands. They revolted often. They were called the Helots. The Spartans were tough, through and through. Sick babies were left out to die. Healthy babies were not pampered. None of this goo-goo gaga stuff. And if you think this is wrong, consider that other Greek cities didn't want baby girls, because then you would have to pay a dowry when they got married. So baby girls were often left in jars by the side of the road to die. Spartan boys began military training very, very young. They suffered cold, near starvation, whippings, exhaustion, rigorous training, and if you survived, you became a Spartan. Women would also get training. They owned property and they ran things when the men were away fighting. Now, as distasteful as what I'm about to say will seem, it was a reality. Spartan soldiers would often take in a 12-year-old boy to help him, and this boy became his companion, often sexual. This practice spread to other cities and eventually became regulated by the states. Fathers would often raise their boys to be handsome and hope that a soldier would take his son in. Let's move on. Now, years earlier, during the Greek Dark Ages, they had lost their language, their writing. But now the Greeks traded and they adopted the Phoenician alphabet, added vowels, began writing again, and the Greek language spread. The New Testament would be written in Greek. Philosopher Thales measured the height of the Egyptian pyramid by measuring its shadow. Anaximander brought a sundial from Babylon, and he also said that man descended from a fish. Now laugh, but this is significant. He was theorizing that the cosmos of man's existence was without the help of the gods. Does that mean atheism? No. Greeks respected the old beliefs, and whenever they took steps away from these beliefs, the thought of no afterlife made them apprehensive, and they would always come back towards some kind of belief system. An archon named Solon was chosen to mediate the problems between the rich Greeks and the poor debtors. Solon drew up legal forms, and his plan was to forgive the farmers' loans, give the poor the right to vote, spread power by creating a council of 400, encourage trade, and offer citizenship to craftsmen from other places if they moved to Athens. Well, these plans were not accepted, and Solon was driven from the city. He was ostracized. The Athenians practiced ostracization. A council would unite and vote, and you could be banished for 10 years for any reason whatsoever. So the poor approach a general named Pisistratus and make him a tyrant. He leads them, and after 16 years beats the Athenian army and adopts the legal reforms that Solon had proposed. Pisistratus would govern wisely. After his death, there were tensions again, but now the poor had a vote. They could call popular assembly. The people were ruling themselves. It was not a complete democracy. Foreigners and women did not have the power to vote, but it was a start, and very innovative for its time. Now the Athenians began going to war with the Thebans, with the Corinthians, with the Euboeans. When the Aeneans asked Athens to help them fight against the Persians, Athens does, and they burned the Persian city of Sardis. Well, the Persians got angry, and they sent a navy to crush the Aenean revolt. King Darius of Persia arrives on the plains of Marathon. The Athenians prepared to fight the Persian Empire. General Miltiades would send a runner named Phidippides to ask Sparta for help. So Phidippides runs 150 miles in 2 days, arrives in Sparta. Then he runs back another 2 days for 150 miles to tell General Miltiades that the Spartans would not be coming, at least not right then. So General Miltiades defeats the Persians in 10 days, a true leader. Phidippides became the inspiration for the 26 mile called the Marathon, being practiced still today. And General Miltiades, after defeating the Persian Empire in 10 days, would later be accused of stealing public funds. He would go to prison and die of gangrene. Anyway, the Persians lose and go home. King Darius swears vengeance and prepares another invasion, and he prepares for 3 years, but he dies, and his son, Xerxes, takes up the cause. Xerxes arrives with a few 100,000 men, including his bodyguards, the Immortals. Athens and Sparta unite to fight the Persians. King Leonidas of Sparta, with 300 Spartans and 700 volunteers, hold back the Persian army for several days by keeping the Persians in a bottleneck in the mountains of Thermopylae. A traitor shows the Persians a pass through the mountains, and King Leonidas and his men are massacred. But they did buy time for Sparta and Athens to regroup and defeat Xerxes. And as much as we admire the Spartans and King Leonidas, we must also give credit to the general of Athens, General Themistocles, who organized the final victory. Yet afterwards, he was ostracized for his egotism. Themistocles ironically went to live in a Persian territory, became governor, and stayed there for the rest of his life. Sadly, after Athens and Sparta defeated the Persians, they became rivals among themselves and dragged other Greek kingdoms into their wars. The Athens formed an alliance with other nations, forming the Delian League, and Sparta headed another set of alliances called the Peloponnesian League. They fought each other for 30 years. Sparta even got help from Persia, its former enemy, and defeated the Athenians in 421 BCE. After all of this, Persia regained much of the land that it lost decades earlier under King Xerxes. During these times, General Pericles became a leader of Athens, who ruled with persuasion and was credited with promoting the arts and culture. He beautified Athens with gardens and temples, including the Parthenon, a temple dedicated to the goddess Athena and a symbol of democracy. He fought against corruption, and if you went to court, it was hard to bribe a jury because you had to be very rich. The jury was made up of 500 jurors. The poor could serve in the state. Pericles led Athens against Sparta for 20 years. When a plague broke out, the people turned on him. He was fined, but then reinstated. But the plague had taken both his sons. Then he became ill and brokenhearted, and he died. Pericles was named first citizen of Athens, a master statesman. Pythagoras was known for his mathematical achievements, such as the Pythagorean theorem. Herodotus was called the first historian. Previous to this, historical records were mostly notes, annals that were put in archives or chronicles. It was very dry facts. But Herodotus would read, he would analyze causes and consequences. He traveled, and he would interview people. He made history alive. Socrates was one of the fathers of Western philosophy. He concentrated on the concepts of right and wrong conduct. He didn't write down his ideas. He discussed, he questioned and questioned and questioned everything, believing that a lot of questioning would lead to the truth. Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth of his day and ordered to drink poison. One of Socrates' students, Plato, believed that good was an actual entity. He also believed that only the skilled, the best, should govern. Plato wrote a guide called The Republic, the first book of its kind, with a guide on how to govern and achieve state goals. Plato's student Aristotle found every aspect of life worthy of analysis. He set aside mysticism and tradition, and he wrote about the implementation of logic as well as several sciences. His works have mostly survived, and he became so renowned that Macedonian King Philip hired him to tutor his son, young Alexander, later to be known as Alexander the Great. Euclid wrote The Elements, a work of plain and solid geometry, arranging theorems in successive sections, influencing future minds such as Galileo, Copernicus, and Isaac Newton. Some believe that Asian science didn't progress until Euclid's writings reached them. Hero, or HERON, invented a steam engine. Believe it or not, thousands of years ago, a steam engine. Unfortunately, he used it on a small toy as an amusement. Epicurus, a philosopher, stated that seeking pleasure would equal contentment, and he brought about the movement of the Cynics, who sought release from the material world. Philosopher Zeno introduced Stoicism. Stoicism is not being devoid of emotions like some people think today. No, it's living on rationality, accepting fate. If life gave you something to endure, endure it and stop complaining. He also rejected slavery, which was a big deal at the time. Hippocrates, the father of medicine. He was one of the first to say that disease came from natural causes and not a punishment from the gods. He opened a school of medicine. He concentrated more on patient care and prognosis. He believed that healing was a power of nature. He used observation and documentation, and he shared his medical records. Today, worldwide, doctors take an oath to help heal the sick. It's called the Hippocratic Oath. It's unfortunate that the Greeks would never unify its city-states, but they would go out, pick up other cultures, and give back. The Greeks introduced democracy, revolutionary for its time. The Greeks would also teach us how to think, change the thought patterns of people, to accept humanism, rationalism, and stop basing our thoughts on just mythology and superstition. The Greeks would celebrate the human form in its sculpture. They accepted art and beauty. And now, Alexander the Great, born in 356 BCE in Macedonia, son of King Philip II. Legends surround his birth as being the son of Zeus. He received military training, was tutored by Aristotle, had a passion for Homer, and became king at the age of 20. Alexander was a military man. He secured the borders. He pressed east and conquered Tripoli, Danube, Taklantil. He spent 2 years fighting and conquering the Persian Empire. He conquered Egypt and finally invaded India, where he was finally persuaded by his exhausted men to return to Greece. He was rash, impulsive, pragmatic, charismatic, brave. Alexander was a visionary. He built an empire. In 11 years, he never lost a battle. He died at 32. Alexander founded 25 cities and cultural centers. He increased trade. The Greek language, culture, and population spread. It was called Hellenization, most of it Athenian. Alexander became a role model to Rome. Now, unfortunately, he left no successor upon his death, so his empire was divided in 4. Cassander would rule in Macedonia. Lysimachus would rule in East Thrace and Asia Minor. Seleucus would rule by the Indus River, and Ptolemy would rule in Egypt and Cyprus. Now the pharaohs in Egypt would follow the Ptolemaic line. Alexander would become a role model to future Rome. Now, the Roman Empire would conquer Greece later in 146 BCE, making it a Roman province. And this is where I will stop this history. Now, I do want to discuss other regions such as Rome, India, China, and the Americas. But for the next video, we will discuss other early African empires. That's for the next video. Until then, comment below. This is Cool Talk.